back. Spectrum wants to hear your views. You can SMS at any time during the show. Type Spectrum, leave a space, type in your contribution and name, then send it to 7197. Your views, our interviews on Spectrum, Radio 1 FM 90.
A very warm welcome. This is Spectrum on Radio 1. I'm your host, Edmond Kizito. On Spectrum tonight, tackling injustices and abuses within the Great Lakes region. What is the agenda of the 4th Ordinary Summit of Heads of State being held in Kampala? The 4th Ordinary Summit of Heads of State and Government, under the auspices of the International Conference on the Great Lakes region, has begun today at the Speak Resort Munyonyo, bringing together about 500 delegates. The highlight of the summit is the special session on sexual and gender-based violence under the theme United to Prevent End Impunity and Provide Support to the Victims of Sexual and Gender-Based Violence. The decision by the meeting to discuss sexual and gender-based violence at the expense of other burning issues is questionable, but the impact it has had on security, stability, and sustainable development in the Great Lakes region is documented. Recently, the plight of women in regards to sexual violence has been a topic at the United Nations, with reports tabled indicating mass rape, especially in the Democratic Republic of Congo or the DRC. Reports on gender-based violence have also indicated suffering in many countries, including Uganda, where domestic violence and other forms are well documented. Stakeholders are demanding that adequate resources be allocated for prevention and protection against the violence and rehabilitation of survivors. They also want all steps to be taken to punish perpetrators and to end impunity of the crimes of sexual violence and illegal exploitation of natural resources. The Great Lakes region has so many challenges, ranging from instability, bad governance, human rights abuses, to mention but a few. If this is the case, why is the focus now on sexual and gender-based violence? This question and many more will form a basis of discussion tonight, the basis of our discussion tonight, as we look at the summit being hosted by the Ugandan government. Our guests tonight, Mr. Mubaraka the Gender-Based Violence Program Manager at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. You're most welcome, Mr. Makubuya.
Thank you, Edmond. Good evening, listeners and viewers.
Viewers, because we're also on the internet, you can watch our videos of Spectrum off YouTube. We're also joined by Ms. Naisola Likimani, Advocacy Officer at the African Women's Development Communications Network, a continent-wide group with 38 member countries. You're most welcome, Ms. Naisola.
Thank you for having me.
Mubarak, you would like to understand a little bit about this ICGLR. What is it, the International Conference on the Great Lakes region? How did it begin and what is it all about?
Well, thank you. The International Conference on the Great Lakes region, abbreviated ICGLR, is a regional body that brings together 11 member countries. We call them core because there are 8 co-opted countries, but the core countries are 11. And the easiest way to know which countries form the ICGLR, you just have to look at the map of the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's got 9 neighbors, and then add Kenya. So you get DRC, get the 9 countries that border the Democratic Republic of Congo, and add Kenya. That makes the 11 member states of the International Conference of the Great Lakes region. Its origins can be traced back to the Dar es Salaam Declaration in 2004, which addressed issues of democracy and development in the region. And after that, there was a pact that was again agreed by heads of state in the Great Lakes region in 2006 with 10 component protocols addressing various important issues that are critical in the Great Lakes region. As you realize, the Great Lakes region was known for all sorts of bad things. There was war, and as you will remember, at one point in time, almost all the 9 countries around the DRC were at war with each other in that vast nation. So it's an organization that evolved out of the commitment of the leaders to address issues of security in the region, issues of peace, and issues of development. And today we mark 5 years, because the pact was adopted on the 15th of December in 2006. So today also marks 15 years, and it's remarkable that on its 5th birthday, the heads of state are considering an issue that is very, very important, yet pervasive in our society today.
All right, pervasive, you say. Naisola, could you talk to us about how serious this issue is within the region, on the continent and within the Great Lakes region?
Sure. Well, first we should be clear what we mean when we say sexual and gender-based violence. It includes all forms of violence that target people based on their gender or that disproportionately affect either men or women. So we're talking about things like domestic violence or intimate partner violence. We're talking about rape. We're talking about defilement of children. Things like trafficking, forced prostitution. These are, female genital mutilation, FGM. That's a form of SGBV. So you can see it spans a whole range of issues. And it's actually a crisis, if you ask me. It's an epidemic in Africa, but more specifically in the Great Lakes region, because of the incidence of conflict and internal strife in this region. So for instance, we already know about DRC and the reputation it's developing. In Eastern DRC, we've seen something like 1,100 rapes per month. That's just in one small section of one country. And this is not to be confused. Let's not say it's only happening in conflict areas, because in a place like Kenya, which has been relatively peaceful,
yes,
we've seen half of all women over the age of 15 have experienced domestic violence.
In Kenya?
In Kenya.
Half the women above the age of 15 have experienced sexual and gender-based violence?
Yeah, domestic violence in particular.
Yes.
There are some communities within the Great Lakes region where female genital mutilation is at 98% incidence. Yes. So these numbers really show you that it's a crisis. It's widespread. It does escalate with conflict. So we do see the brutality is more severe in conflict situations. The incidence is increased in conflict situations, but you can see this constitutes a crisis.
Can you give us a little bit more detail on it, the ramifications of this? How does it manifest itself on a day-to-day basis? Give us a rundown on that a little deeper.
Well, I'm sure your listeners can even testify to this, that either they themselves as women primarily, because SGBV primarily targets women. And this is because of women's status in society right now. But they can testify either they themselves have experienced sexual gender-based violence in one form or another, whether it's harassment, stalking. Again, it spans a whole range. Whenever your bodily integrity has been violated in some way or another, that is SGBV.
Okay.
So either they themselves, somebody they know, their children, their parents, their neighbor, somebody in their lives for sure has experienced SGBV. Yeah.
When you talk about stalking, what do you mean? Can you give us a little bit more detail on that?
About stalking?
Yes.
Yeah, the threat of violence is violence. So you don't actually have to physically attack me for me to feel violated.
Yes.
If you just threaten me, if I feel that I'm in danger in some way,
right,
if I can't walk on the streets after 6 p.m. because I'm afraid I'm going to be attacked, my rights have already been violated. I don't even have to be attacked.
Right.
Yes, that's what I mean.
Okay, we'll talk about what happens in workplaces as well later. But first of all, Mubaraka, what do we expect out of this conference? Heads of state have shown up, which means it's a serious matter. That's what they are doing to come here. Head of state from Zambia, Tanzania, Kenya, and other places. What do we expect to come out of this?
Well, the heads of state, as we speak right now, they're in Munyonyo. They are most likely, or most certainly, going to come out with a declaration on the theme of this fourth summit of the heads of state, and the theme is united. So the declaration will be showing that they will be acting on SGBV on a united front in the ICGLR. In the areas of prevention, so they'll be looking at all those actions that will deter or prevent acts of violence from happening. And that's why you see that we'll expect a declaration that will address issues like early warning systems and other measures that can lead to violence happening. For example, war.
Yes.
So if they can work on preventing war, for example, we expect them to come up with specific commitments on eradicating existing armed groups, because these are, once you see armed groups somewhere, people moving in certain ways, then you know that there's likely to be war. And if there is war, research and experience in the Great Lakes and elsewhere has shown that sexual violence intersects with war. So when the heads of state say we are going to take every measures, first to eradicate those existing groups in a united manner, and it's through this organization and the cooperation under ICGLR that, for example, the Lord's Resistance Army LRA and ADF have been successfully wiped out of most of these bushes where they have been existing, because there is that cooperation among the different countries. There is a specific protocol on non-aggression and mutual defense. So these heads of state will be urging each other to expedite measures to ratify, domesticate and implement that protocol. I mean, these are fundamental measures that the heads of state are committing themselves to, and that way you are preventing.
Yes.
But they're also going to make specific commitments, for example, around financing issues or interventions that support survivors. For example, they are talking about recovery centers. These are one-stop centers. Currently, when one rape occurs, you need medical attention to avert the risk of contracting HIV/AIDS, to avert the risk of getting unwanted pregnancies, to even manage the tear that goes with that, the health complications that go with that. You need medical care. You need psychosocial support, people to provide you with counseling services. You need legal redress so that you can access justice. But in many cases, these institutions work in silos. So the one-stop centers is a model that has been tested and worked in some areas. In Kenya, for example, there is the Nairobi Women's Hospital, which provides a one-stop center. It's just like a supermarket where you go and buy onions, buy sugar, buy bread, buy a bicycle, probably even buy a car. So it's where you want to go and get all these services. And also research shows that when you provide for such services, then you reduce the secondary traumas that victims of sexual gender-based violence suffer by the non-responsiveness of the different actors that are supposed to assist them. So they're making clear commitments through a declaration. And this declaration, in many respects, or in many of the areas, they're even putting timelines. They're talking about within the next 12 months, within an agreed time frame, so that there is a framework for accountability. There's a framework that we can track jointly with civil society and other partners to move forward. And so on the heads of state, we have the deputy, the deputy of the UN Secretary General.
Yes.
Her Excellency Rose Mijiro, she's here in Kampala. We have the UN Special Representative, UN Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, Margot Wallström, here in Kampala. We have the President of the African Union. So it's a meeting that Jean Ping.
Yes.
So we have all these important guests here in Kampala, all dialoguing. They have put their heads together to dialogue on this very important subject. So the outcome is quite encouraging, and we hope that really this is the time to make a difference.
This is Spectrum listeners on Radio 1. Tonight, tackling injustices and abuses within the Great Lakes region. What is the agenda of the 4th Ordinary Summit of Heads of State being held in Kampala? Our guest, Mr. Mubaraka Makubuya, Gender-Based Violence Program Manager, Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and Ms. Naisola Likimani, Advocacy Officer at the African Women's Development Communication Network, also known as FEMNET. You'll be able to call in towards the end of this discussion so you can contribute or even ask questions. Naisola, he mentioned secondary trauma. It's bad enough to go through what you've gone through. When you don't receive attention, that's secondary trauma. Is that a serious thing?
It's a very serious thing. You can imagine when you've gone through something like a rape, for instance, and you go to the police station and they laugh at you. You want to get the form to file the complaint. and they charge you for this form, you know. You go to the hospital and they somehow imply this was your mistake. How are you dressed? What did you do to deserve this? Or, you know, this happens sometimes to women, don't worry. So that is considered secondary trauma, and it's really a result of a lack of awareness on the part of security sector, the healthcare sector. They're just not aware of the role they play in preventing and dealing with sexual and gender-based violence.
And is it, what are the roots of that? Ignorance or what? Or is it because to have too many men in most of the decision-making places?
Both, actually. Part of it is ignorance. I mean, there are laws in place in most of these countries. You'd be surprised if you look at the books in DRC. They have beautiful laws on gender-based violence. So that's not the problem. The laws are there, but do people know about them? And further, have they internalized them, or have they met up with a barrier, a cultural barrier that happens to us a lot when we talk about issues of women's rights? A social barrier, traditional barriers, religious barriers. So the laws are there, maybe you've even been trained and you've received a manual, you have procedures you're supposed to follow. What actually stops you from implementing? And what we're finding is that there's actually been a lack of internalization of these things, even by the general public. They actually do not see gender-based violence as a problem. It's been very normalized in our societies. We talk about it very casually. We see it in the newspapers, we gossip about it, but we don't see it as a crime, as the way we should see it, or the way we see other crimes that are clear-cut. But when it comes to issues of women and children being violated, we tend to see it just as, you know, well, these things happen, and okay, let's just go talk about it. You know, we've even seen cases where, you know, a child, let's say a young girl, has been raped, and the two families will come together, mostly maybe the two, you know, patriarchs, the men, and they'll discuss, what are you going to give me to make up for what you've done?
Count the number of gods.
Yeah. And I don't know where else this kind of negotiation happens when somebody has been so thoroughly violated and their whole life from that moment on has been affected. So that shows the lack of seriousness in terms of us really addressing this issue, which brings me to actually why it's so critical that presidents are now deliberating on this. That level of political will cannot be underestimated. It shows that it's actually a crisis and it's being addressed from the topmost level, and that everything should flow from there. Money should flow and be allocated well. Laws should be passed where they haven't been passed. You know, the judiciary needs to accelerate its processes, because the presidents have now said, listen, this is costing us money, it's costing us security, and it must be taken very seriously.
Mubaraka, can you talk to us about how this issue becomes a security matter, sexual and gender-based violence?
Oh, well, interesting, because you'll note that right even from the UN Security Council, the United Nations Security Council, the mandate of the United Nations Security Council is to promote international peace and security.
Yes.
You'll see that they have, right from 2000, when the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 was passed, they're talking about the effects of war on women and children. Usually the people who are battling, the people who are fighting, are men.
Yes.
But the negative effects go on the women.
The grass of the women.
Absolutely. They are raped, they are taken as wives, abducted, and so on and so forth, and the children, and so on and so forth. Even when you go to the IDP, the internally displaced people's camps where they existed, you find the majority of the people who are there who are women. So and yet
they are also widowed, by the way.
Absolutely. And even widowed, and so on and so forth. Yet they never ever participated in peace building and conflict resolution mechanism. So there was that motivation for the international community to discuss the role of women in peace and security issues. That's how it started. But again, over time, you'll see that in many of these places, the Balkans, the Rwanda wars, in the Congo, in West Africa, a systematic form of violence against women was seen, particularly rape. And rape was used, or has been used, by very many of these negative forces as a weapon of war.
Yes.
And actually, UN Security Council Resolution 1820 classifies rape in situations of armed conflict as a crime against humanity.
Oh, you can go to the ICC.
Absolutely.
For propagating rape within your ranks.
Absolutely. An act of genocide. You see?
Right.
So that uplifted the crime because it's admissible within the context of the ICC statute. And because of that acknowledgement that this is a very important problem that was affecting very many women in these areas, standards had to be set. It was looked at as an act of war. It's not just a question of men trying to venture into their sexual desires and whatever, but it's systematic because it's been used. And it's because of that actually even within these instruments, they have even introduced the principle of command responsibility. Because as leaders, command responsibility means that if you have any troops in any place, they have leaders.
Yes.
So if a small person in a platoon rapes, that responsibility goes to
the man at the top, commanding that.
Absolutely. So that you can put in place measures to prevent those actions from occurring.
Since you have authority anyway.
Since you have authority to deal with those issues. So it's a very, very big problem. Within ICGLR, we have a specific protocol. One of the protocols that support the pact that I talked about of 2006 that established the Constituting Act of the ICGLR is an act on prevention and suppression of sexual violence against women and girls in the Great Lakes region. It also has specific issues and also describes and defines rape in those situations as an act of genocide, as a crime against humanity and so on and so forth, which then also makes it homegrown, because many cases people say, no, you see the ICC is Western and so on and so forth. But even locally here, we've denounced this through these statutory principles. Now the challenge is, how do we domesticate these protocols? How do we implement? How do we enforce? And that is one of the critical issues that the leaders are discussing in Munyonyo.
All right. So outside of conflict, is it a thing of the rich, the poor, educated, uneducated? Who are most culpable?
Actually, going back to what Naisola just said, violence is an act that is aimed, in general terms, it's any act that's aimed at hurting someone. It could be physically, it could be emotionally. They can decide to keep quiet.
Yes.
But for as long as you get hurt,
it's been a weapon.
Absolutely.
It's a sword.
Absolutely. That's why we talk about emotional violence. It doesn't have to be physical. It could be
so it's got nothing to do with wealth or education.
It's got nothing to do with wealth or education. And that's why we say that at the root, in many cases people talk about violence and say the root cause is poverty. It's not poverty. Because even I have a friend who was an LC1 chairperson in Korolo, that's a place of A class, who shared with me and told me,
equivalent of Muthaiga in Nairobi.
Absolutely. That 9 in 10 people who went to his house as LC1 chairperson to discuss their problems, it was an issue of domestic violence.
In Kololo?
Absolutely. What does that mean?
9 out of 10
complainants. It was an issue to do with domestic violence. And at the root of this problem is unequal power relations and abuse of power.
Abuse of power.
Then the contributing factors are many. It could even be wealth. Some people are very loving when they are poor.
Yes.
But when they get the money, they turn violent. Some people have the money, when they become poor, they turn violent.
Right.
Others, it could be alcoholism, it could be war, it could be anything. But people who drink and people who don't drink are perpetrators.
Right.
People who are rich and people who are poor are perpetrators. So it affects everybody. It affects women because they are women. Irrespective of faith, irrespective of economic status, irrespective of education.
This is Spectrum on Radio and we're going for a break. We'll be back. Do stay tuned.
Just like an uncut diamond is brought to life by unmatched skill and dedication, only our brewmaster holds the secret to crafting a crystal malt lager. Under the exacting international standards at Now Breweries, he uses only the finest, most carefully selected grains of roasted crystal malt and sets in motion the delicate process of releasing their full roast. The result is a world-class beer with a fresher aroma, a richer golden color, and a maltier taste.
Nile Gold Crystal Malt Lager. Beyond an ordinary malt.
Not for sale for persons under 18.
Let the sunlight in. Good morning, sunshine of my life. You look happy today.
I am. I came in here and I saw there was a whole pile of washing to do.
But I thought you didn't like doing the washing.
No, I love it. Anything else you need washed?
Sunlight 2-in-1 with added fabric softener. Smells so good, you want to use it again and again.
Let the sunlight in.
Sunlight 2-in-1. Sunlight clean, sunlight fresh.
Sunlight in. Happiness is all around. Let the sunlight in.
Spectrum on Radio 1 FM 90 is brought to you by Stanbic Bank.
Welcome back on Spectrum tonight, tackling injustices and abuses within the Great Lakes region. What is the agenda of the 4th Ordinary Summit of Heads of State being held in Kampala? Our guests tonight, Mr. Mubaraka Makubuya, Gender-Based Violence Program Manager at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, and Ms. Naisola Likimani, Advocacy Officer at the African Women's Development Communications Network, based in Nairobi but covering 38 countries on the African continent. You'll be able to call in and contribute to this discussion. I'll read out the numbers when that time comes. Naisola, you cover Africa basically. Which country is most affected by this vice?
Well, definitely the countries that are embroiled in conflict. As Mubaraka has explained, sexual and gender-based violence increases dramatically in situations of conflict. But because data is very hard to come by, it's actually difficult to make an assessment of exactly how every country is doing. And this has been one of our recommendations here at the summit, that we must be able to collect reliable data on the situation of SGBV. This is the only way we can know whether our interventions are working, what to change, what to do differently, and to really hold our governments accountable. One of the reasons we see that data is very unreliable is because people are reluctant to talk about violence against women. It thrives on silence, this epidemic. That's the only way that it's remained at this level for so long. People are afraid to report, they're afraid to admit that they have been exposed to this or experienced this. There's a lot of stigma still attached to some forms of this violence. When you talk about rape, even when men are violated, I think they are the most silent, because it's not only women that get violated. When men get raped in situations of war,
even men sometimes get raped? Oh.
Yes. It's a much smaller percentage, maybe 5 or 6% reported by men.
All right, go on.
They get raped by other men, and they really almost never seek help.
Right.
Never report, never go to a doctor. Some die before they would actually say that they've been raped.
Right.
Yeah. So this thing really does thrive on silence. The shame, the humiliation, and mostly the way your community might treat you when they find out you've been raped and you're now pregnant with the rapist's child. You know, some people get kicked out of the home. It's really a real crisis in the way we're responding to SGBV. So because of that, people don't report. And that way, we actually cannot tell exactly how we're all doing. Even as people say, oh, it's getting better, maybe governments want to say, you know, we've improved, we've done this, we've done that. It's very hard to tell because the statistics are really not that reliable.
Let's move a little bit away from the violence places, the places of violence. Let's talk about the workplace, for instance. On a day-to-day basis, is it common or does it manifest itself there as well?
Yeah, I mean, even
in the office.
Yeah, absolutely.
Corporate ladders.
Definitely. It's only lately we've started to see employment policies that actually address sexual harassment in the workplace. It was just considered business as usual. This, once again, is the normalization of violence. Being able to pat somebody on the behind, this is just normal.
Right.
You know?
Making lurid remarks.
Even just making sexist jokes that are not related to somebody sitting there, but that will make a woman very uncomfortable.
Yes.
This is just considered, boys will be boys.
Right.
So it's a recent phenomenon that we now have policies and that they're actually starting to be enforced. But women will tell you that this happens all the time. Even the implication, the suggestion that if you sleep with your boss, that you'll get the promotion.
Promotion is on the cards.
Yeah. That's just considered normal, So this is definitely happening in the workplace.
All right. Mubarak, talk to us about Uganda, the Ugandan profile. How do we rate?
Well,
outside again of violence, places of violence.
Certainly the problem is nationwide. The Demographic and Health Survey of 2006 showed a very disturbing picture.
Yeah.
If you looked at the map, every LC1, every village, every community in Uganda has different forms of violence, physical or sexual,
right,
or otherwise. Emotional violence is difficult to even capture, but we know that it does exist because surveys have revealed that it does exist. But if you just took, for example, physical violence, 6 in 10 women have experienced
physical violence
right, since the age of 15. 1 in 4 reported that their first sexual intercourse was forced against their will.
25% of adults.
25%, 1 in 4, yes, women from the age 15. So that's a very big problem. It's a crisis.
Yeah.
Of course, there are variations. You would see that the East Busoga region does very, very poorly, and then South Central areas of Masaka and so on in terms of sexual violence, West Nile in terms of physical violence. And
is that because of cultural inclinations?
There are issues of culture, yes, down there, particularly patriarchal culture, but also which reinforces issues of unequal power relations. It's quite critical. We wouldn't tell whether it's culture that leads to heavier rape in Busoga vis-a-vis other areas. Maybe another study has to be done. But at least the data suggests that it's there. And that data is confirmed by, again, the results of the reports that the police receive. As you might even know, the police publishes an annual crime report.
Yes.
And over the last 5 years or so, defilement is among the top 3 crimes.
Yes.
Name all the crimes: theft, burglary, everything. Defilement.
Is it because reporting has gone up? Has it always been there, or is it because of something else?
Even those that go, the reporting is still low. Because the same data shows, only 12% of people who have suffered violence have sought help.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of underreporting. But even with that underreporting, whatever you get is a problem.
Right.
And then here is again the other problem, that even those that report, securing a conviction is a very big challenge. For example, in rape, if you look at rape, the law is very clear. If it's aggravated defilement,
yes,
in which case the victim is below 14 years, or if you defile this person and you infect them with HIV/AIDS and so on, where the aggravating factors, the maximum punishment you are liable to suffer on conviction, death.
Yes.
But how many people have been hanged or whatever because of defilement?
Right.
And it's because you're supposed to prove the case beyond reasonable doubt. Now, when somebody is raped, there are so many missed opportunities or imperatives.
Yes.
Like, for example, you're supposed to collect medical legal evidence within 72 hours.
That's 3 days.
People keep quiet and report after years. We've had women who say, I was raped in 1983.
30 years ago.
She's speaking out today.
Right.
How do you get justice? That's because of the feeling of shame. And the problem is that even when you have sex, consensual sex,
yes,
with a loving partner,
yes,
you're not willing to discuss that with strangers in public.
Right.
Now, if it's rape, it's very humiliating. You're expected to go and give evidence in court before so many strangers.
Court.
Absolutely.
So
our court system is adversarial. Absolutely. Although with recent reforms in the law, they are providing for
cross-examination.
Absolutely. I think, like in matters of defilement, the judicial officer, it's at their jurisdiction. They may decide. They may decide to hold it in camera or not.
But there's still a cross-examination.
And so on and so forth. Because of the penalty.
Right. Because they have to be absolutely sure.
Absolutely. I'm told the lawyers believe that you'd rather let 9 criminals free
nine
than
criminals
convict
go
one
free.
person. Yes, convict one person wrongfully.
Right.
So the burden of proof is very high. So you need to get DNA matter. How many machines can do this DNA test? How accessible are they? So there are all these challenges.
We had only one in Mulago, which I think went on holiday.
So these are the challenges that we have. And these are the challenges that the heads of state are
looking
about
at right now.
Absolutely.
Talking about the heads of state, Naisola, what are some of the topics that they're tackling right now as we speak and broadly, during this conference?
They're tackling several key issues. One of them that's on the table, which I believe they're going to agree to, is that there needs to be a zero tolerance campaign on SGBV crimes and impunity in the Great Lakes region. Because the conversation on SGBV is not happening as it should.
Yes.
There's a lot of misinformation and there's a lot of impunity. So even though people may recognize there's a problem, we still don't see perpetrators being held to book.
Yes.
For example, in DRC, in the space of 2 years, I think it was 2005 to 2007, only 2% of cases of SGBV were taken to court in South Kivu. So that means you have a 98% impunity rate.
Yes.
I mean, where else do you see that? Where else do you see people perpetrating a crime and 98% walk free?
Almost 100%. Almost.
Really, you might as well say 100%. So the issue of impunity is so critical, and our heads of states are going to commit to launching campaigns at the national level, calling for zero tolerance on SGBV crimes and impunity. So that's one very important item on the table.
Yes.
The other one is the need for a much more multi-sectoral approach to the way we deal with sexual and gender-based violence.
Yes.
We've talked about it as a security issue, but it's a health issue. It touches on education. It touches on issues of defense. It touches on, you name it, across the spectrum. The same kind of response we saw to HIV in Africa, where everybody, whether it's Ministry of Labor, everybody saw the part that they had to play to address this epidemic. And that's the same thing that needs to happen with SGBV. It can't.
We need to create a huge campaign.
Yes, and everyone needs to see their responsibility in the matter.
Yes.
It can't be left to the Ministry of Gender. It can't be left to the Ministry of Health, because that's the silo that it has been in already, and it has not worked.
You want it out of the silo.
We want it out of the silo.
Let's have a component in the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Finance.
Absolutely.
Embedded in the education system and other.
Yes, because SGBV touches every aspect of our lives as women. So let's not just say...
Have a cross-cutting approach to
Absolutely, and multi-sectoral in nature, as we call it.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about secondary trauma. How can it be stemmed? Because the woman has already suffered this violence. It's bad enough. But then when they walk out of there's not enough help. That's what you call secondary trauma. Give us some more detail on that.
The primary thing that's needed really is increased sensitization and awareness on this by the various people that are responsible for response to SGBV.
Right.
So whether it's police, whether it's judiciary, whether it's the lawyers, the nurses, the doctors, you name it. And even beyond that, even in schools, we see a lot of violence against girls in schools. Some by teachers, but it's rampant. So how does the principal, the headmaster or headmistress respond? So for me, they're also part of the response mechanism.
Right.
All these people must be sensitized as to their role. They cannot be violators of women because of negligence.
Right.
So there must be training that comes as an integral part of the curriculum, let's say, in police academies, in nursing schools. It must be, even teachers training, SGBV has to be integral.
Right.
It can't be a 1 hour session at the end.
Right.
Yeah. So for us, we really believe that training is really a prevention mechanism. These people must be aware of the role they play, that they fall under the law. They must do this.
Right.
This is not an option.
Okay.
And they will be held accountable if they are found to be negligent. In fact, we know that in Zambia, there was a case of a girl who was defiled by her teacher several times. And actually, the courts in Zambia found the Ministry of Education liable because they did nothing. They didn't...
The entire ministry.
Absolutely, in a civil case.
Right.
They were held liable for negligence. Why didn't they do anything? This was reported to them. The teacher was under them. The headmaster or headmistress was under them. And nobody did anything to help this poor girl.
Right.
So they had to pay. So they need to know that there are also legal repercussions for failure to act.
Right. Mubaraka, let's talk about Uganda. If you had the power buttons, which ones would you press to address this problem?
Well, one of the things that we are actually trying to put in place are these one-stop centers, the recovery centers.
Yes.
Ideally, this is a center where you are able to get multi-sectoral services.
Yes.
For example, if somebody is raped, you don't need to go to a police station. You go to a health facility.
Yes.
If you went to Mulago, there is a police post there.
Yes.
Build the capacity of that police post. Put their police form 3, which does record the
rape details.
Absolutely, the rape details and so on and so forth. At no cost, because at times you go, they ask you for money, then you wait, and then they respond quickly. Because some of them are system issues, improving systems, and that's why Naisola was talking about training these people to be sensitive. Don't dump this person together with a thief. You have been raped, you're a victim. You go there, they put you with somebody who was caught stealing a border or something, together like you're a criminal.
Right.
Safe place to ensure that there is recovery.
Right.
And then quickly do the medical attention.
Yes.
Do the psychosocial counseling.
Right.
Under one roof. Legal aid under one roof. And then ensure that there is effective communication between the different agencies. The police that is doing investigations. The DPP, the Directorate of Public Prosecutions, who are doing the actual prosecution. Working closely with police, for example, there could be prosecutor-guided investigations so that cases are investigated quickly.
Prosecutor-guided investigation.
Absolutely. Some of the cases take long. Case cycle, one rape case, 3-5 years, you've not determined the matter. That also causes trauma. Justice delayed
is justice denied,
and causes trauma. So it's these issues of improving efficiency in terms of executing justice, in terms of delivering the health services, in terms of many of the people are poor.
Right.
You ask me for money to buy the police form 3, that also causes trauma. So we are trying to address some of these issues.
So Spectrum on Radio 1 tonight, tackling injustices and abuses within the Great Lakes region. What is the agenda of the 4th Ordinary Summit of Heads of State being held at Munyonyo in Kampala? You can call in now. Our number 0414 348 111 0312 260 390 0312 261 390. When you call in, please tell us your name and where you're calling from. Spectrum, hello?
Hello.
Hello.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir. We can hardly hear you. Your name? Go ahead.
Yeah, Jimmy.
Your name?
Give me the name. Thanks for being the studio. I want to thank Mubaraka for coming in, old boy in Fair Primary School, and the effort is a very good one. But one thing is very clear: as long as you have government not being very concerned about some health-related issues, when the budget is not read well in that direction, your efforts should rather attract more support from others who think Uganda need more care than its own government. Mubaraka, have a good evening.
Thank you.
Alright. Okay. Alright. Spectrum. Hello. 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 Okay. Would you like to respond to that?
Well, thank you, Jimmy. He made an observation about financing and through the budget. And my response is that this is one of the issues that the heads of state are discussing, because incidentally this meeting that is happening was advocated for by the Regional Women's Forum of the ICGLR.
Okay, let's hear from another of our listeners. Spectrum, hello? Hello?
Good evening.
Good evening to your name. Okay, hello? Hello? Good evening, sir. Your name?
I am called Edmond and I salute Mubaraka and the colleagues there.
Okay. Okay, this is an inexplicable problem with the lines. It's Spectrum Alert. Talk to us right now. Okay. Let's continue with the discussion.
Okay. Just to say that the Regional Women's Forum thanked their heads of state for having come up with very good laws.
The Regional Women's Forum.
Yeah, Regional Women's Forum for the ICGLR International Conference. It's one of those forums that contribute to the policy agenda of the ICGLR. They came up with a request during the special session on illegal exploitation of minerals that was held in Lusaka, Zambia last year, exactly a year ago, on 15th of December 2010. And they requested the heads of state to convene a special summit on SGBV to address these challenges. That we have good laws, we have all these issues, but they seem not to be working. So, can you address these issues? And they had specific recommendations. One of them is about finances. And the heads of state and the first ladies, the other issue is that they came with their first ladies, their wives, united to deal with this issue. We are optimistic that something positive will come out in terms of financing. Actually, there is one of the issues around financing health, justice, gender machineries to be able to do their work. Because GBV, the analysis has shown from the study that was carried out to inform this summit, regional study was carried out, showed that GBV is not only a security issue, but also a core development issue that has serious implications for achievement, for example, of the Millennium Development Goals. If you have GBV, sexual violence, you will not be able to address issues of poverty. Women contribute 80% of agricultural labor. Many of our countries are agricultural. So if they are abused, productivity will go down.
Yes.
So you won't achieve MDG1,
you won't get good economic
poverty eradication and hunger.
Right.
They also produce food.
Yes.
You will not be able to attain your goals around education.
Right.
Because when girls are defiled, they get pregnant, they come out of school. 50% of primary school children in Uganda are girls.
Right.
So if they are defiled and they get pregnant, or they leave school because of fear of that harassment, you will not achieve those targets on education.
Right.
And so on and so forth. Maternal mortality, HIV, AIDS, infant mortality, you will not achieve all those goals for as long as we don't address SGBV.
Naisola, yes?
If I may, that we must remember that it's government's responsibility to protect its citizens.
Yes.
And we cannot let them abdicate that responsibility. I think the caller was suggesting, look, they're not actually financing this issue, so we find money elsewhere. We go through other ways. But to me, that is allowing our government not to actually be our government. They're there to protect their citizens. They're failing to do so. They've signed on to so many instruments, human rights instruments, regionally, internationally. So they've committed themselves, and they're legally bound to do so, to actually implement them, and they're not. So for me, the question is really that this political will must be found. And for me, money comes from political will. Money is there. If Kenya declared war on somebody tomorrow, money would be found, believe me.
Well, they are in Somalia.
And they found the money.
It wasn't in the budget, most probably. Naisola, talk to us about a campaign. If you were to format a campaign, how would you do it?
Wow, well, it needs to reach all different levels of society. It needs to be in schools. It needs to be at the grassroots.
Let's hear from another of our callers. Spectrum, hello? Hello? Okay, the line still seems to be rebelling. Spectrum, hello? Alright, it's going to be rectified and future should be better. Naisola.
Maybe the line is being violent to the session.
Well.
The talk show.
Something to be discussed probably. Yes, continue, Naisola, please.
Yeah, so the campaign really would be to let everybody know exactly what SGBV is and what their rights are as relates to that. People need to know exactly what to do when they're violated, for instance. We've heard Mubaraka talk about one-stop centers. This is happening quite well, being implemented quite well in Rwanda. They've also got toll-free hotlines, which I think is another very good thing. People have cell phones these days.
Right.
And if they're violated, if there's a line that they can call where they're told this is what you should do immediately. So we stop having these lapses in collection of evidence and all that we've discussed. So these types of things, we raise the profile of this issue because if we're saying it's a crisis, then it needs a suitable response.
And you profile this crime. You tell people if you make lurid remarks, you really are being violent against the woman.
Yeah.
If you stare at her, in the workplace or wherever, or she passes by you and you begin to whistle and so on, you would profile it and let people know what they think was innocent or maybe appreciating what they grew up doing. It's actually wrong.
Right. And just tackle this issue of normalization of violence,
right.
which is it's so normal that we don't even see it anymore. So now we need to distinguish it, just as you've said. What is sexual harassment?
Right.
What is threatening behavior? What is psychological abuse, as we've talked about, where you're not touching me, but somehow I'm afraid for my life when I'm around you. I feel controlled by you. I feel like I can't talk around you and you're my spouse. That is violence. So people need to just be aware of what it is, call a spade, seek help, and this is where we must have places that they can seek help.
Right.
We need these one-stop centers.
Okay.
We need healthcare personnel who know how to respond, so that we're not just raising awareness of people and then there's this vacuum where they don't know where to go, nobody's responding to their needs.
Yes.
So it needs to be happening at both levels, government, civil society, and with the citizenship.
Mubaraka, in Uganda, what are some of those cases that are forms of violence, actually, SGBVs, that are accepted generally?
Well, one feature about SGBV in general is that it enjoys some form of social acceptance.
Yes.
If it's physical violence, people feel it's normal to beat women, and you've had all these misconceptions.
The former vice president complained, and the man said, "Oh, I slapped her only once."
Yeah, don't you see? And even these people say that if you don't beat the woman, she complains that you don't love her. There are all those distortions, but all these are lies of patriarchy, because patriarchy, we live in a patriarchal society.
So it's not true that to show a woman you have to beat her.
We live in a patriarchal society, and patriarchy has taught us so many things that we think are normal. In many cases, it advances the male cause.
Right.
Sexual violence, again, when a man, and masculine identities, when a man has 10 women, that's the real man.
Oh. But that's violence as well.
Society, and that's what drives them even to rape.
So polygamy is also SGB.
It's normal to have as many women. Some schools of thought, absolutely.
We'll have to go.
Maybe we'll end it there for today.
Another time, maybe we'll talk about that. And of course, like you say, if you love a woman, don't beat her like some people think.
Buy chocolate or flowers.
Chocolate or flowers, very good. Thank you very much, dear guest, Mr. Mubaraka Makubuya, Gender-Based Violence Program Manager at the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. Thank you very much for coming to Spectrum tonight. I've learned a great deal myself, I must confess. Miss Naisola Likimani, Advocacy Officer at the African Women's Development Communications Network, covering 38 countries in Africa. Thank you for coming to Spectrum. Their head office is based in Nairobi. Thank you for tuning in. I've been your host, Edmond Kizito. Spectrum will return tomorrow. Up next, there's the news in English. Do stay tuned.
John, Mike and I, we go back a bit. We knew John at the beginning, working for someone else. But he was different. He had vision, saw opportunities. He started working towards